let me welcome our speakers back, ladies and gentlemen, at Parham, Mathilde Marengo and Ali Hainoun.
So, thank you, our panelists and speakers for great presentations. I had a couple of questions, and you actually managed to answer many of them throughout your presentations because they were very well prepared, and so that answered a couple of them already. And thank you, the audience, for staying with us till the end. And I would ask you now to also think about your questions. If you have something you'd like to ask the panelists or discuss with them, you can do it either through the app or you can just ask. I will give you the opportunity in a minute. So just think about what you heard and if there's something that resonates or you'd like to elaborate on. The first question I would have maybe for all of you is related to impact. Like one part of measuring impact is to better understand the impact of interventions and the effects they have on the city, or understand performance of existing urban systems. But what is very important from my experience for decision makers is to better understand the potential impact of solutions in a planning phase. So what can we do to improve the way we use data to make informed decisions, and specifically to get the best impact cost ratio when we decide what kind of variant of certain measure we implement or where we will implement that measure. Okay. Can you start with Ed?
Yeah. Okay, and sorry for answering all of your questions earlier, because that's making this more difficult, isn't it? I was going to talk about a couple of things. One was, if you're measuring impact, then actually if you're looking at cities are really big and slow to change. And it's really, really difficult to measure. Say you change a part of the city and you build a new master plan. That takes, there's examples like in London, King's Cross, that they started designing that in the 80s, and it's still being worked on now. So I mean, that's like 30 years to change a big piece of the city. So it's really difficult to measure the impact of some of these things. One of the things that we have been doing is that we had a Horizon grant, and we've been partnering with University of Cyprus, UCL, Chalmers, Torino, and through that project what we did was go back to look at projects that we worked on that had been implemented, and to actually collect data, see what happened, see did it have the impact or how did it change, and then to go back and compare the models that we made 20 or 30 years ago to see did it have the effect that we expected it to. So that has been really, really interesting. There's been lots of problems with that, or so not problems, but challenges. One of them is that some of the projects that we worked on, it was 1996 or 97. Some of the data that we had, it was a scanned PDF that someone had written over the top of. We didn't even have it as a digital format. So some of these places we had to re-digitize things. The software had changed 3 or 4 times since then. So what we ended up doing was making a model of a historic scenario and seeing if we could backcast what the movement figures would be. So there's ways of doing it. The other thing that I wanted to really quickly mention was that if you want to have the maximum impact, or if you can use data and analysis to target an intervention to basically see where is there a problem and how could you start to address it, rather than trying different bits of the same city, or the same city has different characteristics in different places, and some of those characteristics will have a different effect on how well something works. You can use analysis and you can use data as part of this to be able to explain a problem and to really target interventions to have the maximum impact. So you can use it during decision making as well, but you need to validate those models.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Do you want to
I'll jump in
to that?
I'm so thrilled about this Horizon project. I have a very good friend who's an anthropologist, and he works in an architecture studio, and he's always complaining that, well, he's always complaining, that's a bit rough, but he pointed out one time that as architects we often don't go back to our projects to look at how people are actually using them, and I think that's a really fundamental step. So this sounds really fantastic to understand, you know, what you designed, how it's actually being used, and then understand, you know, what are the meeting points and how that evolves. I completely agree with what Ed was saying, that not only is the city very slow to change, but I think society is also changing very rapidly. So the way in which we interact with spaces, the things that we do in spaces, our activities and therefore our needs are constantly evolving. And so I think it's not just about understanding that the city is very slow to evolve and understanding what or how decisions translate into spaces where certain behaviours might take place. But I think perhaps we also need to dedicate more time in order to better understand on a granular level what the people really need. And I think that if you really understand the diversity of needs and you begin to really respond and co-create those, then you have the potential perhaps in a slightly longer process, but to have a space that potentially meets the needs of the people or the individuals that are navigating that in a closer manner. And so I think that you spoke about sort of impact and being cost effective, time effective. I think that perhaps, you know, sometimes we also need to know where to slow down a bit and really take the time that's necessary in order to be in the long run meeting the target, meeting the needs that are really on the ground.
Thank you. So that's maybe from our perspective as not urban planner, rather as urban energy planner. It's relatively the daily question is about impact when we have some so-called interventions, like now the example of positive energy district, which I mentioned. So we defined, for example, now 8 domains where we can evaluate the impact. So the energy part is in terms of energy efficiency improvement. We compare with the baseline case now, if I refurbish or build new building, how much energy I can save. I can evaluate also the cost from the economic perspective, how much I spend to achieve, for example, from around 120 kilowatt hour per square meter. So in terms of insulation, I'm going down to 40, how much I have to spend in terms of per kilowatt hour saved. So we have other impacts we need to show in certain KPIs. That's really a KPI showing I reduce the energy consumption by 30%. So I increase the share of renewables, and we are taking care on the socio-economic aspect and governance. So we need also to account for this very tough and challenging aspect of consumer behavior, awareness, perceptions, how we can convert something which is not quantifiable, intangible statements saying, yeah, they are engaged and the contribution of engagement make around 5 or 10% of the energy saving, which the uncertainty is huge. And the last one is even we have impact in terms of governance. We provide somehow recommendation for cities at the end of a certain project, how you should, for example, plan and implement your refurbishment or new built environment. Yeah, that's maybe something about that comprehensive impact.
Okay, thank you all. And before we go to the audience, I have another question, because you explained your approach and your solutions very well. I would like to take this opportunity to go behind the scenes a little bit. What was the motivation behind those projects? So if you could explain what or who motivated the need to understand the impacts in your particular areas. And this kind of second part of the question is, what do you need on part of the city as an expert to be able to provide the impact? I think it's interesting because a lot of people in this room maybe are thinking about, okay, so could we actually do some of those things? So if you could take this opportunity to take us behind the scenes a little bit, I think that could be very interesting.
Okay, I can continue.
You can start, Ali.
So the trigger for this, it's not only one project, several projects. I mentioned there are sometimes
you can choose either one, or if there's a common pattern.
There is an initiative, for example, at the EU level, this smart and climate neutral cities. It is driving and triggering the discussion about how we can transform cities. And one domain when we speak of climate neutrality is how we can reduce CO2 emission or GHG emission maybe. So the driver behind that is this very high level energy policy requirement. We call it energy and climate goals, defined at national scale, but now more and more from the very high level, EU or national or internationally, they are defining these goals and we are trying to adhere to that. But as already mentioned, it's not only the strategy itself, the transformation pathway. We need to advise cities a little bit more to show the way how we can convert these strategies in real actions. And since we are not in the position to have any real-world experiment at city scale, so we have at least very much predefined boundaries where we could speak about verification. That is the play between both aspects interactively between tools and real solutions, where we could then claim, because they want to say, okay, if I demonstrate the functionality of this solution now, what is about the exploitation plan? What about the replication? And much more the discussion now about business model. So the EU want, when we propose some solution, they want to understand, is there any business model behind that? So we can ensure that the replication is financially viable, economically optimal, and so on. So those things are maybe drivers and expectation at the end also. The expectation of the side of the city is very important for us to show us the direction toward the goals we have set.
Mm-hmm. So in your case, it's kind of high-level energy strategies or policies that then trickle down to the cities and they realize,
yeah.
Okay, so, and when you work with the cities on those challenges, what really helps you to deliver value, or what you really expect to find internally in the city in terms of people,
yeah.
infrastructure capacity to be able to work with them?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. We say the strategies we are developing are not ours. So cities, they need to take the ownership to these strategies. Because of that, we are applying what I mentioned, this participatory process, from the co-design to co-creation to co-learning. So this process, we are constructing and implementing that with cities. So when they do that, they feel ownership, so that they say, okay, that's our strategy. Not something is being done from consultancy saying, okay, do it in this way. No, we say, we learn with you together what is the best transformation pathway. And that gives us a little bit, or a lot of thrust and motivation to move in this direction.
Okay, thank you.
I think for me, there were two main things that motivated me personally as an individual in my work, and one of them is personal experience, the understanding that I make decisions to navigate the city every day because of certain factors that perhaps my friends might not make for different reasons. And then the other one was that I have been working with data-driven planning processes for the last, let's say, 10, 12 years. For a period, we were doing a lot of research in the European context, where we often have access to great and disaggregated data sets, although there is still a lot of work. But more recently, I started working with my colleagues in the Latin American context, and we started realizing that the data told one story, but the reality when looking into it from a qualitative or on-the-ground perspective began to tell a very different story. And so this mismatch produced an important level of frustration, because we obviously want to design for the context, for the people. We're not interested in imposing a generic vision. And therefore, how can we in some way repair or create a bridge between what certain data sets say and what the reality of the context is? And this is where we began to sort of go back and forth between like very granular on the ground data and understanding how we could use or leverage from social media to other kind of like more distributed technologies in order to collect also a kind of closer, but while working from afar, data that could reveal certain behaviors, certain patterns that would then be useful. And so I think that there is still a huge amount of work to be done, but this meeting in the middle, of course, like the work that the colleagues here are doing on different scales is also hugely contributing to this. But I think there still is a need to really understand everyone's perspective, everyone's needs, and also how we can engage with these technologies, not just in a sort of context of privilege and let's say global north situations, but how they might be able to be adapted or leveraged for different contexts. We saw this morning with Martina, for example, and her work, and I thought that was really great.
I would have just also a quick follow-up. If you could very quickly comment on what enables you to work with the cities you presented. So in Barcelona, you had Riyadh, quite diverse cities. So what it is that you will go, okay, yeah, this is the city that I can work with. They are ready. This is something I want to do. Is there any common denominator of the cities that you are able to work with and provide that value?
Well, I mean, I think as all things, it comes a little bit through personal connections. But also obviously the interest and the identification that there is an issue makes it much, much easier to create meaningful connections. No? So Barcelona is a city that has been implementing over periods, over the last 10 to 15 years, definitely a lot of focus on gender, on understanding data, on the ethics of using data in planning and how we might be able to collect that. Vienna is an excellent example that we actually often visit and go to, and I think that there needs to be in some way an interest, but we also, because of the fact that we're working in educational frameworks, we also ask our students come from different places around the world, and so for example we worked in Medellin because we had a student from Medellin and she was particularly interested to explore this topic in Medellin, and I think that also gives us the opportunity to really sort of dive into realities that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do. And in that sense, once again, I'm very privileged that I'm working in a context that allows me to do that. Actually, this morning there was a question to Teppo, which I didn't manage to ask him, but there was a question about how do you fund the work you do, and this one is a bit of an open question, but I think, you know, we need to, on one side, create opportunities, and there needs to be structured opportunities for us to do these things.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight that you actually need personal interest of somebody in the administration, but also the insight that maybe having students that are interested, they can work with, and then again, help you with local insights is also helpful. Ed, I have one extra question for the audience to sort of package in, because somebody asked what the city you did a master plan for was. So
yeah, okay.
And then you can answer the rest.
Well,
as well.
I was going to talk about this to answer your question anyway, which is helpful, isn't it? That was Astana in Kazakhstan, and I think probably one of the things that I mentioned that there was a difference between the competition phase and the actual master plan phase itself when we were doing it. What we realised quite early on was that we weren't going to be growing the city. It was about making what was there work better. And the approach that we had was we said, okay, we've got these models and they can start to explain if we put these conditions in place, that can allow certain activities and that can allow particular outcomes to happen. But the really important question is who should set those outcomes? Because obviously we were a team of consultants in London and Italy, and we had an international team that was working on it. But it shouldn't be for us to go to another city and say, here's what you should do. This is our view of things. But it is helpful to have kind of international best practice. There was kind of local objectives in policy. But actually what we started to do, and this is what became really helpful, was when you were asking this question of what do you need in a city, actually the people we were working with were really, really good. They were really open. They wanted to do that. They were really driven to do the best possible thing they could. And so the start of the process was that we said, look, we've got these tools that can work. The question is, what do you want to happen? We said, a lot of this policy is set by people who might be kind of career politicians. They might only be in this city for like 2 years or so. And actually what's really important is the people who are really invested in the city are the people that live there. So we then went through a series of workshops of actually engaging with people, not so much to kind of co-develop things and generate strategies and these things, but to ask them, what do you want it to be like to live here? And what does that actually mean? So that was really interesting and that was really helpful. We could then take away those insights we got and we could then start to find cities that delivered those things on the ground. We could then work backwards and we could find out how to measure the cities that produced those kind of activities and outcomes. And then we could use the plan to actually target an intervention to put the conditions in place to allow that outcome to happen. So, I mean, I think there's a really interesting thing, which is actually why you're doing it and who should set what happens. And it was, in our case, it was an example of, it was a mixture of 3 different groups. There was international best practice, there was local policy, and there was local residents and stakeholders as well.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for taking us a little bit behind the scenes and how is it to do those things from your perspective. And I ask audience now if there are any questions that you want to just ask. Yeah, there's one, Franz. I have it on the... Oh, yeah, I know. It's okay, so I can say it. Let's make it more interactive. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the presentations. My question was like, I see these models as something that could be applied more universally. So if you have like ideas for reusability or maybe even like open sourcing these models to be applied elsewhere.
So anyone who wants to start, you have something that can be just used, found on the internet or anything. And Ali,
Are you going? All right.
Ali has to go. Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Unfortunately, Ali informed us that he had to leave early. So thank you again. And it's up to you too now.
So I think it's a really interesting question about open source. And there's lots of different ways of making things open. It might be open data, it could be the software, it could be the actual models that you produce. We have made lots of our tools open source. There's challenges that come with it. One thing is making sure that people know how to use things properly. Another thing is that if you're going to make a tool open source, you need not just a big community of users, but within that community of users, you need to have enough people that can maintain the code and update it and make sure that it's still working. So that's a really tricky thing. I mean, we see lots of tools which get developed through a grant. It gets produced, it gets made open, but the funding for the grant has finished, and as soon as it's released, it's then just left. And it's a shame, really, because there's lots of interesting stuff that happens. I think that probably, I was going to apologize for raising a really boring issue. There's something which is actually about agreeing a set of standards. And I think if you can agree, or maybe not so much standards, but modeling specifications to say, for this type of model, do it in this way. Here's these particular metrics you can run on it. Here's these outcomes or questions that you can address with it. If you can agree on those specifications early on, in some ways you can become a bit technology agnostic. So somebody could develop their own tool. It's going to produce the same model, the same metric in the same way as someone else who does something completely different. So for me, there's a really big question about whether it's actually open source software or open data. Open data, I think, is really good. If it's to the right level, everybody can shortcut what they're doing. You can start from a different platform and you can all work towards the same thing and validate things. And that's a really scientific way of building on top of things that have already been found. And yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of all three, but I think actually opening the software is the most difficult, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we also tend to share the work open source. We have a GitHub account where we upload everything. Actually, we have several GitHub accounts according to sort of like the specific topic. I think that this all needs to be taken a little bit sort of like critically, not just creatively, but also critically. I think there are a lot of open data platforms, but again, sometimes the data tells one story, sometimes there's bias, sometimes it hasn't been collected completely. So I think that whatever sort of step you are in, it's really important that you in some way unpack the complexities behind the process that has led to whatever that entity is that you're looking at to be the way it is. And I think this is really, really important because there can be a lot of misinterpretations or assumptions or bias produced by just applying certain pipelines or taking certain data sets as fact. In that sense, I would invite you to read a book that I really enjoyed called Weapons of Maths Destruction. If you haven't read it yet, I would recommend to jump into that. It's quite a short book, really nice read. But I think it's always important that we don't only look at it from a kind of positivistic aspect, but we also try and understand, where all of this could go wrong, so that we can, navigate this from a just perspective in some way. But this being said, yeah, we also aim to share everything openly. I mean, FabLab Barcelona, which was the first FabLab in the European Union, and actually they did the Global FabLab meetup here in Prague this year, is part of our institute, and part of the philosophy and the values there is always to share tools and knowledge in an open manner in order to enable the most people to interact with it and innovate through it. So,
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes left, so there's a time for one last question from the audience, if you have any.
Everyone's under the seat.
If not, I have one. Hope there's enough time. One thing that has been discussed in the first session was this balance between internalizing capacity to work with data in the cities and the development, and work with external experts and companies and providers. And we also discussed this is very different from for large cities and small cities, that you work with both. But from your specific perspective, expertise, what do you think makes sense to have internalized in the city? So we have expert or type of officer you really like to have as an insider, and what can be provided externally as a service from your side? So how do you see this balance between internalization and externalization?
Yeah, and you're right, there is a really big difference between larger cities that have, especially in the UK, if you look at the distribution of cities by size, there's a really long tail. Almost all the cities that are probably 1 million, more than 1 million, they've all got their own local ecosystems. They've got universities, they've got bigger departments, they've all started doing things to really address these things. And they're probably quite good at those things. I think the bigger question for me is, what do you do with this long tail, all of the smaller places which are really under pressure? One of the things that I showed was a tool that is for local authorities to use when they're doing their local plan to see the impact of allocating housing. And that was done with another consultant. That was made as simple as it could possibly be. And one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of these places have had their funding cut for the last 15 or 20 years. They might only have 3 or 4 people in the department. You might make something that's as simple as it can possibly be, but it's still one more thing that somebody has to learn. So I think the answer might not be about there being a specific role. It would be to do with having just more funding, more people. When there's enough people to do the job that they're meant to be doing, I think then it's the time to think about capability. But it's first of all to get the capacity there to begin with.
Yeah, right, because in this instance, even having the one person that just is aware of that problem to be solved and then to contract somebody is quite a lot to ask from them if it's 4 people. Yeah, you're right.
It's sort of like all firefighting.
Yeah.
I think that's the way of describing it.
I think also the importance, perhaps not just having the people, but having the opportunity to, for example, attend conferences or spaces where you can see different perspectives is really important. Our experience is quite interesting because Barcelona has the Barcelona, and then there are the satellite cities, which are fundamentally part of Barcelona, but they are separate councils. And there, I think this is one place that I see that there's a lot of space. The central Barcelona obviously has a lot more power with respect to the satellite cities, but the satellite cities offer or are very excited to make, Barcelona as well, but the satellite cities are also often very excited to make collaborations with us within the educational space. So perhaps it's not quite as structured, but there are a lot of opportunities for them to explore in different ways possible visions that perhaps then can lead to more consolidated projects. And I think that that's an interesting space to integrate education, research, and innovation together. I think also the need to constantly be upskilling and be up to date. I mean, education does not end when you finish your master or your PhD, but we need to be educating every day. And so, again, the space for people in city councils, and not only to actually attend conferences, to see or to take part in spaces where they might get into contact with innovation. And I think these are all sort of essential things in order to ensure that the cities are up to speed, and we are done.
Okay, thank you. So I think that, again, probably two lessons for maybe cities like Prague, to actually allow people to have the space for the education and to attend conferences and exchange with other cities, and also to maybe find ways how to work with smaller municipalities and share services and share know-how, which I think is also quite a big challenge for.
I think also it's the
well.
educational spaces that need to reach out to the cities as well. So we need not to work in silos. We need to work together.
Definitely. Thank you very much. And now I will pass back to Lucia. So thank our two remaining panelists and also Ali who are left. So thank you. Thank you too. Thank you for staying.